Hey, balance patches sure are cool, aren't they? If there's a character that's too good, you get to see them get their legs blown off, and if the opposite, then you get to see a character who's not so good get some help. Some get more than a little help though. For a character to go from bad to amazing is something all low tier mains wish for, and sometimes those dreams come true. Today we're looking at the biggest glow ups in fighting games, characters who went from not great to absolute killers. This is Dee Jay. He made his debut as one of the 4 new challengers in Super Street Fighter 2 and returned in the console versions of Alpha 3. Capcom then brought him back in the Street Fighter 4 series. Problem is, they didn't make him very good. From his debut in Super Street Fighter 4 up until Ultra, Dee Jay was regarded as a low tier, bottom 2 or 3 at worst. Keep in mind, this meant he was competing for the position of worst character with Dan, who was a joke character that was intentionally made bad. Dee Jay is a charge character. You can make some parallels to Guile as he has a back charge fireball and a down charge up kicks as his anti-air, but there's plenty of unique stuff that Dee Jay offers. Dee Jay had a number of flaws that made him not bad, but just very, very mediocre. Being a charge character, he naturally has a defensive playstyle since he's usually holding back to charge his fireballs. He had a good fireball for zoning, but his anti-airs weren't very good, so if the opponent preemptively jumped over his fireball, you'd either have to block and take the ensuing pressure, or you'd just get hit. His up kicks are his primary anti-air, but he couldn't charge it while tossing fireballs. He also couldn't combo off his fireball without doing very difficult links after since it didn't grant him much advantage on hit. Dee Jay's specials all being charged made his combos very awkward in general. His theoretical best enders, machine gun upper and up kicks, were both down charge, meaning he couldn't combo them off his standing buttons, and both moves had wonky and short range that left Dee Jay unable to use them to end his combos. Usually you'd end combos with Light Sobot, which gave you a knockdown, but that also made his damage pretty limited. So a low damage character is already pretty bad, but he also suffered in fireball wars. He needs to charge his fireballs, meaning he can't hammer them out like Ryu or Ken or Sagat could, but he had no ways to gain ground against fireballs besides jumping or walking forward, unlike Guile, who has command normals that let him move forward while maintaining his charge. His kit had a bunch of just little annoying things that hurt him throughout the game's lifespan, like EX upkicks, his main reversal, not hitting characters if their hurt box was too low. His best tool was Knee Shot, which was an excellent jump-in that had a ton of active frames, but it could still lose to most invincible anti-airs. The biggest problem with this character was that his game plan was just not defined well. He had some rushdown tools and some zoning tools, and they didn't mesh together at all, leaving him with a wonky and inconsistent playstyle. Wonky and inconsistent damage, wonky and inconsistent zoning, wonky and inconsistent anti-airs. There was no reason to play him. Other rushdown characters had better rushdown tools, other zoners had better zoning tools, and nothing unique that Dee Jay offered was worth it. It didn't help that Capcom just fucking refused to buff him as SF4 received more updates and versions. Oftentimes, whenever he would receive a change that improved a part of his kit, like making his combos more consistent or fixing problems with his moves, they'd nerf him in other ways to compensate, like cutting his damage, as if that was a fair trade-off. Or, hey, we gave him a better invincible reversal with EX machine gun upper, it's also more unsafe on block, making it easier to punish. Hey, here's a cool buff, the light version of Sobot is now more safe on block, making it a better pressure tool. But a low tier like Dee Jay having better pressure is just too powerful, so they also removed its invincibility to lows. Even the developers acknowledged how bad this character had been in the patch notes for Ultra Street Fighter 4, which is hilarious but also kind of fucked up. Anyway, the SF4 series ended and Dee Jay didn't return in SF5, however he was revealed as one of the base roster characters when SF6 leaked, and with a bitchin' new redesign came tons of changes and tweaks. Dee Jay is arguably the character that received the most changes out of every returning character in 6, but it's important to note that while they're similar in many ways, SF4 and SF6 are also very, very different games, and much of Dee Jay's strengths come from this drive rush. I know it's a meme by this point, but it really cannot be exaggerated, how having arguably the best version of an already strong universal tool is such a blessing for this character. The help it gives in pressure thanks to the extra plus frames that it gives his normals, and the sheer speed and travel range is one thing, but Dee Jay's own moves were also retooled in many ways to make him much more of a complete character. His fireball is maybe the most overt example of how much Capcom wanted to help this guy. In SF4, most characters' EX fireballs were multi-hitting and had stronger properties as well as faster travel speed. Dee Jay's just fired 2 fireballs, each with normal properties. It was worse than pretty much every EX fireball, so naturally, SF6 Dee Jay now has this as a regular special. The heavy version of Air Slasher fires out 2 projectiles for no meter cost, while the new EX version, or OD as they're known in SF6, is this giant fucking nightmare wheel that travels insanely fast and far. He can chase behind it with a drive rush, and it launches allowing for combos. The biggest change Dee Jay underwent in SF6 was to his motions. In his prior appearances, all of his special moves were charge, but while he still has his fireball and up kicks as his back and down charge moves, machine gun upper and rolling Sobot are now standard motion inputs. Considering these moves were both primarily combo enders, with Sobot having the added bonus of being a good extended poke, this change makes these moves far easier to use. Machine Gun Upper in particular is now much better as a combo ender, and contributes to one of Dee Jay's biggest strengths, which is his incredible damage. Another big change that buffed him was the addition of feint versions of his specials. The light version of his fireballs, upkicks, and Sobot will perform a unique animation with faster startup and recovery that's meant to fake the opponent out. Light fireballs can be used to bait anti-fireball tools like Cammy Spin Knuckle or Drive Impact. Light Sobot spins Dee Jay in place, making it a great setup for a throw, and you can use it after anti-airing with 4HK to let him enforce some very scary mix-ups. Finally, the light version of upkicks is essentially a short hop, which synergizes perfectly with knee shot's insane amount of active frames, although it's still weak to DP, so watch out. The final new trick Dee Jay has up his sleeve besides some spiffy new supers is Juzz Cool. Juzz Cool is a totally new move and one that should be feared. Dee Jay does a backstep, which he can follow up with quite a few options. The most notable is the light kick follow-up, Funky Slicer. See this? This is the crushed dreams of Plats, Diamonds, and Masters all rolled into one. Funky Slicer is fast, sports phenomenal range, and is a great shimmy tool. Shimmying is the act of walking into the opponent's face and walking back. The key is to bait the opponent into thinking you're going for a throw. After walking back, their attempted throw break turns into a whiffed throw that you can punish. Given that it starts out of Juzz Cool, which is literally a backstep that has Dee Jay back away from attacks, it already fulfills the role of acting like a shimmy tool. With how good Drive Rush Throw and throws in general are in this game, Funky Slicer turns any attempt at breaking those into a juicy punish counter for Dee Jay to take advantage of. It'll straight up beat many low pokes as well as Drive Rush check attempts, and the best part is that at -3, it's totally safe on block. The only real issue is that you can only combo off of it on counter hit or punish counter, but that's barely a problem because this move was made specifically to create situations like that. He also has an overhead and a launcher as well as a dash he can use for side switches. Dee Jay, as any SF6 player watching probably knows, is one of the best characters in the game. His previously vague and dysfunctional kit was retooled and he was given a highly aggressive game plan with tons of flexible tools for defense and just plain fucking with the opponent. Fireball zoning obviously isn't as good in this game due to drive parry, but he can still use his fireballs to safely poke at a distance and to bully characters in Burnout. I really like what they did with him. They gave him new things to play with while keeping many of his legacy tools and characteristics intact, which I think is how it should be handled. You don't have to completely rebuild a character who wasn't that good in prior games. You can keep the things that made him Dee Jay and give him new tools to make sure he isn't stuck in 2014. A great gameplay makeover, that's for sure. Still nerf him though, please. Seriously, what a pain in the ass. Dragon Ball FighterZ was a dream come true for myself and many people who wanted a modern 2D Dragon Ball fighting game after years of copy-paste arena fighters, but once the novelty of such a thing went away, there were definitely cracks in the seams. Don't get me wrong, Season 1 of DBFZ was a lot of fun for how primitive it was, but there were lots of issues. One of the common ones I saw brought up was how similar all the base roster and Season 1 DLC characters were. Not in the sense that they all had the same special moves, but more so the very homogeneous game plans. Most characters had little variation in how their tools worked and the same general playstyle. It didn't help that the universal mechanics like Super Dash were so strong. When Season 2 began in 2019, the devs sought to fix that and did so with the first 2 DLC characters of that year, Jiren and Videl. They were unlike any characters in the game at this point. Opinions on Jiren were quite decent at first and most people saw him as a solid character, but things didn't take very long to change. Even today, Jiren is a pretty unique character in DBFZ, and his tools are very different from lots of other members of the cast. The biggest example of this is Jiren's 5H. For most characters, 5H is just a generic strike that causes a wall bounce. For Jiren, it's this big ol' beefy command throw. Having a throw on a single button means he has to structure his pressure much differently than lots of other characters. However, this is also where the issues with Jiren begin to show. You'd expect this throw to be pretty good for opening people up, but it wasn't. In fact, it was the opposite. Even in the current version of the game, it's pretty slow, coming in at 26 frames of startup. When this bald fucker first came out though, that shit took a whopping 31 frames before Jiren grabbed ya, giving the opponent all the time in the world to jump, or super dash, or vanish, or mash. Jiren severely struggled when it came to mix-ups. Obviously his slow-ass 2H wasn't hitting anyone offline, and hell, even in the game's awful delay-based netcode from before 2024, people who had good reactions wouldn't fall for it. Stagger pressure, the act of delaying the buttons in your strings to catch people trying to escape by jumping or pressing their own buttons, is usually the name of the game in DBFZ, and Jiren's just wasn't that good as he had sluggish buttons with poor frame data, and no real way to reset this pressure without leaving massive gaps that anyone could mash through. So, if he didn't have good mix-ups and he didn't have good pressure, then how did you open people up in this game? The answer is that you didn't. His problems didn't stop at buttons, his specials are insanely gimmicky, and back on release, some of them just straight up didn't work. His 236X was, whatever, just a generic combo ender or extender, but then we have 214X, Shock Tornado, and 214S, Counter Impact. The former is a strike counter, and the latter only works on projectiles. Shock Tornado was okay. L countered mids and highs, and M countered lows, while H covers all three bases. It was fine, but having to spend meter to combo off of it was a bummer. 214S, sheesh, what a fucking mess of a move. This only worked on projectiles, but to tell you the truth, it barely worked at all. The problem is that after countering a projectile, the screen would freeze for a considerable amount of time, during which the opponent could buffer a special or vanish or level 3, which would let them avoid or punish the counter. It was a counter that quite literally failed at being a counter, which sucked considering Jiren didn't have great screen presence. His 5S was a mediocre kinda beam, so you needed to be in the opponent's face where you could hopefully open them up with assists. Having a strong projectile counter would have been awesome, but it just didn't work that well. Jiren's only real saving grace was his godly 2S, which had a huge hitbox and was a great anti-air, but that's about it. Jiren's utter lack of mix-ups and his poor kit left a lot to be desired, and he got left in the dust while a storm of GT Gokus, Bardocks, Kid Boos, and Teen Gohans took over the meta. Well, 5 years have passed. Jiren's had plenty of time to train and also lots of balance patches to revel in. He got a few buffs 2 months after release, but obviously they didn't help much. Nowadays though, he reigns as a contender for top 1. So what happened? Well, let's see. First of all, his normals. So many terrible normals were made to be absolutely killer thanks to the buffs he got in various patches. 2L was notably sped up and he was given the ability to use reverse beat to cancel his 5M into 2L, giving him access to great pressure off of one of his longest reaching normals. 2L went from the best tool on a bad character to the star of the already star-studded show. It's one of the best stagger pressure normals in the entire game. You see, even when he was bad, this was a great button for damage because it has medium scaling, meaning that he gets much higher damage off of it than most characters do on a 2L starter. Combined with the insane pushback and being -2 on block, this will catch most jabs or jumps and make the opponent explode for even thinking about contesting. His 2M was given a massive buff in terms of startup speed, and it also travels insanely far, which makes it a very scary tool in mix-ups and neutral. Jiren J5S and J2S are both amazing now. J2S is insanely fast, and both of these moves are a great way to win neutral thanks to their reach. Oh yeah, and they also made it so Jiren can get a knockdown with J2H mid-screen. Jiren's specials got juiced the fuck up, not just with the same sweeping frame data improvement his normals got, but also their properties. Previously, he had a counter for strikes and a counter for projectiles. Arxis said fuck that and changed up how Shock Tornado and Counter Impact work. Light Shock Tornado, which previously lost to lows, now counters every kind of strike, regardless of if it hits low or not. You might think this makes the medium version useless since it only counters lows, and it kinda does, but remember that the medium version is much faster. Still, the buff to 214L was absolutely godly. It's an amazing way to end block strings. With 4 frame startup, it'll easily catch most mash attempts, since the fastest buttons in DBFZ start up in 6 frames. You still can't combo off of it solo, but one of the game's later patches introduced the ability to tag into your other characters on hit after any special move, without even needing to spend meter, so now you can combo off of it without having to spend resources, albeit at the cost of swapping Jiren out. As for 214S, Counter Impact, well that got buffed in a different way. It previously only countered projectiles, but now? Now it counters everything. Not just every kind of projectile, but also strikes. Beams, Key Blast, Super Dash, Vanish, any move that this counter catches will get punished. It only loses to supers and throws, as well as the initial blowback of Spark. It's still escapable on activation, but the window to mash out a move to do that was made much smaller. Jiren's 236X also got changed, making it a primo neutral tool and combo extender, and his assists also improved. Needless to say, Jiren's come a long way from being bottom 1. He's now truly deserving of the title of strongest. He's fucking ridiculous. His insane damage, pressure, incredible neutral, team synergy, and the sheer fear factor a lot of his tools can create may have taken him a long time to get, but now that he has them, he's really living the life as a powerhouse with few who can contest him. His 5H still sucks though. Rock Howard. This young man originates from Garou Mark of the Wolves, a fun game I should really talk about in depth sometime. Rock is the main protagonist, the biological son of Geese Howard and adopted son and pupil of Terry Bogard. He uses moves from both of them but brings his own spin to things, like this spiffy jacket. Rock may look cool, but his introduction was a piss poor one as he ended up being pretty bad in Garou. Note that he isn't absolutely unusable. There are much worse characters in old games, but Rock is just a painfully average character in a game with a very, very high power level at the top. Rock is a fireball, a solid one, but fireballs aren't that great in Garou due to Just Defend existing, so this really only acts as a combo or block string ender. Rage run's a command run which leads to either a punch that knocks down on hit or a teleport if he's close enough to the opponent. Hard Edge is mostly relegated to combos and guard cancels. All pretty generic and meh, but even his more standout tools don't help much. Rising Tackle is meant to be your reversal. Wake Up DPs in Garou can be tricky as they commonly are only invul for a few frames, so many of them can lose to delayed jump-ins. Some characters can break their DP to remain safe or plus on block after the reversal, which is just as irritating as it sounds, but Rock doesn't have that luxury, so he must commit to his reversal. Crack Counter will counter any strike that makes contact with it. This is a risky move because each version of the special will only counter a certain type of attack. The B version counters mids and overheads and the D version will counter lows. It's cool to see him with Geese style parries, but calling out strikes is always very dangerous as the punishment you take if you miss will often outweigh the minimal damage you'd get if you landed successfully. The special does have one genuine use, which is building bar. It recovers pretty fast, so you can whiff it to build meter quickly, which is pretty nice. Finally, we have his command throw. It's a 360 input, so a little difficult at first, but a solid command throw as a whole. You can cancel the D version of Rage Run into it for a tricky mix-up, but the more standout property is that his command throw is also his break. Every character in Garou has a special they can break, allowing them to stop the animation about halfway through. Most characters use their breaks for plus frames, meter building, and combos, and some can break their reversals to make them completely risk-free. Rock's break only really offers higher damage, which is pretty disappointing, and this is as good as it gets for the guy when he doesn't have meter. Rock's meterless damage is pitiful, and his buttons aren't even good enough to compensate. There are much better sets of normals in the roster. The one thing this guy has to his name is Shining Knuckle, an amazingly versatile super. It's 1 frame startup for the B version and 0 frames for the D version. This means that if you use this as a reversal and the opponent isn't already blocking, they're getting hit. 0 frame startup also lets Rock raw super to punish normally safe moves like Hotaru's 214C. The B version is good too despite the slightly lower startup. You can't complain about a super with 1 frame startup, that's still insane. This super is his primary source of damage and the range is unreal, allowing for whiff punishes that Rock couldn't even dream of doing without it. A good super can make a character sometimes, but this is one positive on top of a bunch of negatives. The likes of Kevin, Grant, and some others are stiff competition, and Rock just doesn't compare. He's far too limited, and even all of his good tools are overshadowed by lots of other characters. A pretty poor introduction considering he was meant to be the main protagonist. Now, Rock Howard has returned multiple times after Garou, but I want to primarily discuss 2 of them where he was significantly better than his poor first showing. First is Capcom vs SNK 2. When SNK shits the bed on making Rock look presentable, Capcom picks up the slack. Rock in CVS 2 isn't that different. He still has all his moves, but they work much better in a game with more grounded pace like CVS 2. His specials and supers are all the same, including his 360 command throw break, which is still useful for netting good damage. The funny thing about CVS 2 Rock is that he works best in K-Groove. Grooves are subsystems, which change many different aspects of your character's mobility, offense, and defensive options. K-Groove is inspired by various SNK games and includes Just Defends, which were originally from Garou. Rock is at his strongest when he taps into his game of origin, and that's pretty cool. Rock in K-Groove has great offense thanks to K-Groove's mobility options of running and hopping, and his amazing JHK makes his pressure very formidable. K-Groove's Rage mode also makes his damage quite good. Altogether, he's a solid high tier. He may not have changed much between games, but the change in pace and some new universal tools to play with makes his versatile kit and playstyle much stronger. Then we have King of Fighters 15, where Rock is part of the DLC Team Garou along with Bijane and Gato. This is a much more recent game and it's gotten patches over the course of the last 2 years or so, but Rock has remained rock solid for most of the game's lifespan, including many stints as one of the best in the game. 15 wasn't Rock's first foray in the King of Fighters series, but much like with CVS 2, his kit is well suited to KOF's fast and aggressive style. There are some notable changes though. Rising Tackle and his command throw both had their inputs changed. Previously, Rising Tackle was a downcharge special and the command throw was a 360, but in KOF, both have been simplified. Notably, Rising Tackle now has a DP input, 623, which makes it much better as a reversal since you don't need to be holding down to use it. It was also given the ability to break, once again paying homage to the mechanics of Garou. I'm sure a breakable reversal is something he would have relished in during that fucking dumpster fire, but hindsight is 2020, and SNK knew better than to bring back plus on block DPs. Rising Tackle has 3 versions. The A and EX versions are invincible, but cannot be broken. The C version is not invincible, and that's the version you can break. It finds its use in combos for some pretty nice damage. The command throw is still pretty nifty too. Rage Run has been retooled with more options for approaching and attacking, and Rock also now has an install. The Deadly Rave EXT, in exchange for comparatively low damage, will enhance Rock's specials and supers for all remaining rounds. With this super, Rock can OTG with Reppuken and Raging Storm, and other specials deal even more damage. Speaking of damage, Rock in KOF 15 is definitely able to do that. The guy does an absolute grip if he can touch ya, and his mix-up is formidable thanks to having a command overhead and also that command throw. Combined with his install and in general being able to make excellent use of meter, he's a devastating anchor, but as a whole is very powerful. Across all 3 of these games, Rock maintains nearly the exact same set of normals, specials, and supers. He was meant to be a jack of all trades with solutions for any problems, but in Garou he was woefully undertuned and his playstyle didn't jive at all in such a game. However, we can see in both KOF 15 and CVS2 that when the pace picks up, Rock becomes unstoppable. So for this next segment, I'm going to do things a little differently and start with the stronger version of the character since I already talked about him. I discussed C-Roa in a previous video, and you can watch that for the more detailed explanation, but here's the SparkNotes version. C-Roa in Melty Blood Actress Again current code is one of the most disgusting top tiers ever. His pressure is insane as he has numerous ways to make himself insanely plus on block. His most prolific special, his orbs are plus 26 and you can lay them down very fast. Orbs give him domineering screen presence, he can combo off them for high damage, they chew through guard bar and do massive chip, and they're air unblockable. His 236C super is absolutely amazing. It's also air unblockable and the full screen reach makes it an excellent whiff punish tool. Combined with other sources of plus frames such as cancelling 236A into 22A as well as solid normals and a good DP, he's an absolute beast. But on his mids, Michael changed a lot. Believe it or not, despite being arguably top 1 in Actress Again current code, he was once a contender for bottom 1 in the prior version, Actress Again. C-Roa changed a fair amount between AA and AACC, but even though the modifications he received weren't totally comprehensive, god damn did they help him out, because he was miserable in his original state. The big change between AA and AACC for C-Roa was his orbs. In AA, they really weren't that good. They are still air unblockable, but that's about the only advantage they have. They have less hits done, Roa can only set one of them out at once as opposed to AACC where you blink and he's already got 3 of the fuckers staring you down, and they whiff on most crouching characters. Even bigger than any of those issues though is the fact that orbs do not change directions in the air. If Roa lays an air orb and the opponent decides to run up right next to him, the orb will completely fucking miss on detonation, making it completely useless for one of its biggest utilities, which is screen control. C-Roa was significantly weaker in terms of neutral. Any character could rush him down, and due to how slow his orbs were and the fact that they didn't switch sides, he had little he could do to deter them. AACC changed the orbs in an interesting way. In AACC they were made much smaller by default, but Roa can now charge them to about the same size as they were in AA. Oh yeah, and also the speed with which he can lay them down. Look at him go, it's night and day. Other changes are definitely observable. 236A and the 22A cancels feel much less plus in AA compared to AACC. 22A in general takes way longer to recover, so stocking charges for 22C, which is one of his best specials, is much harder. 236C is still full screen and air unblockable, but in AA, there's a dead zone right next to Roa where it won't connect. Admittedly, this isn't a huge problem since 236C is primarily meant to be a whiff punish tool at further ranges, but like, come on. So yeah, from arguably bottom 1 to top 1. The funny thing is, it didn't take that many buffs, and he even got some nerfs, like the uncharged orbs being smaller. Just making him a little faster was enough to totally tip the scales and make him truly deserving of the nickname War Crime. The final segment of this video is not going to focus on an individual character, but rather a whole bunch of them. So Persona 4 Arena Ultimax has a cast of 22 characters, but every character, with the exception of Margaret, Elizabeth, Adachi, Sho, Minazuki, Marie, and Shadow Labras, have Shadow type variants. Let me address that last one because it's kinda confusing. So Labras has a Shadow type variant, but there's also a separate character on the roster called Shadow Labras, who is not a Shadow type. Shadow type Labras, Shadow Labras. They have different personas and movesets, so don't mistake the two for the exact same character. Anyway, shadow types in P4AU are a fair bit different from their regular counterparts, and initially, they were inferior to the originals. Shadow characters differ primarily in how they get to utilize their meter, but there are some other changes. Every character who was in the original Persona 4 Arena got new auto combos for Ultimax, but their old auto combos were given to these shadow versions. Also, as a base, shadow types do reduced damage on attacks, but also have increased health. That's all the simple stuff down, so now let's get into the nitty gritty. The big thing about shadows, as I mentioned before, was the changes to how they spend their meter. One of the biggest advantages of shadow types is the immediate access to awakening SP skills. These supers can only be performed in awakening state, which activates at under 30% HP for normal type characters. Shadow types do not undergo awakening, so they always have access to awaken skills regardless of HP. Admittedly, calling this a benefit across every character is tough because it really varies for some. Mitsuru's Awaken skill is one of her best supers since it easily lets her do shitloads of damage by allowing her to land a fully charged myriad arrows. Then we have Rize, whose awakened SP skill is a gimmicky command throw that forces you into a rhythm minigame. Still, having more supers is better than less, I suppose. Shadow type's other major advantage was having access to Shadow Frenzy. You can pop Shadow Frenzy when you're at 100 meter, no more, no less. Upon activating, your meter slowly drains down on a timer, which will count down naturally and also decrease upon using attacks that normally cost meter. So, what does Shadow Frenzy do? Simply put, it lets you hurt your opponent. In Shadow Frenzy, you can cancel specials directly into other specials and all your normals become jump cancelable. Since Shadow Frenzy can be cancelled from any other attack, even other specials and supers, you can use it to extend your combos and take your damage to places you wouldn't even dream of. Supers and skill boost specials will drain from the timer, so you can fit multiple of each into Shadow Frenzy combos, something normal type characters aren't able to do. Shadow Frenzy is the main draw to playing them, and it led to Shadows generally having a more swingy and risky playstyle. Since they had reduced damage on attacks, you were generally waiting until you reached 100 meter and got that one decisive hit, then absolutely unloading everything into the opponent to steal the round, a playstyle that was arguably promoted by the fact that Shadows carried over meter between rounds while normal characters didn't. If you've seen Melty's Shadow Naoto video, you know the absolute hilarity you can enact with Shadow Frenzy, but Shadow types also had a number of flaws that often made them inferior to their normal counterparts in many ways. Besides the reduced damage on attacks, they were also worse defensively. Shadows did not gain access to Awakening State, which boosts defense, but they also didn't have Burst. Burst is one of the most integral defensive mechanics in P4AU as it lets you break out of combos and such. Shadow type characters straight up didn't have access to that. I presume the extra health was meant to compensate for that, but not having a burst still sucks in a game like this. Having to spend all of your meter on Frenzy also meant you were locked out of using your meter for other purposes. Often you'd sacrifice neutral and defense tools for the comeback potential of Shadow Frenzy. Normal types just had a much more consistent game plan and more flexibility. The best Shadows were ones who were already strong characters like Narukami, Yosuke, and Mitsuru. They had the same tools essentially, but were just less stable. Shadow types would later receive buffs in the 2.0 patch of the game. This patch wasn't documented the best because it was never brought over to consoles. Only Japanese players had access to the 2.0 update in arcades, but 2.0 was brought to consoles and Steam with the re-release of P4AU in 2022. Shadow types were reworked in this version, with many of them becoming equal or even better to their regular counterparts, and in general being much more viable. The biggest buff was a change to Shadow Frenzy's usability. In the 1.1 patch, Shadow Frenzy could only be activated at 100 meter, but in 2.0 it's now tied to the other buff they received. Shadow types now have a burst. They now have the luxury of getting out of combos or otherwise using it as a GTFO button, but they can choose to use it for Shadow Frenzy as well. This is such a nice change as it lets Shadows offload meter into other utilities without having to worry about not getting access to Frenzy, and it allows the use of a Frenzy regardless of how much meter you have. Even with a measly 1 SP, you can still cash that out. It won't last long at all, but hey, you can still do it. Shadows don't have access to Max Burst, which fill SP completely when it hits or one more burst, but a burst is a burst, you take that shit. Also, the amount of damage Shadow types do was increased. It's still lower than normal types, but higher than it was in 1.1. The only nerfs to Shadow types were a reduction in the extra health they have, and no longer carrying meter between rounds. With more flexible meter usage, better defensive options, and an altogether more consistent playstyle on top of the other benefits Shadow types received, they're now genuine contenders in 2.0 and stand strong next to their normal type counterparts. It should be noted that not all shadow types are better than normal types. It varies from character to character. Normal types still have more consistent damage output, more versatile defense thanks to Awakening's defense boost, and more burst types, and for some characters, better auto combos. But what matters is that 2.0 shadows are much more solid and less gimmicky, although you can still play them with the game plan of getting one hit and blowing people up with a frenzy TOD. So that's it for now. I always love to see weaker characters get buffed, but let these characters serve as an example that sometimes a small amount of help can quickly turn into big trouble. Still, it's cool when a character gets the help they need. Let me know if you'd like to see a video with the opposite topic, characters who got harshly nerfed. Hope you all enjoyed. Thank you for watching, have a great night, and take care. Hey guys, this is the part of the video where I thank all my YouTube channel members. So thank you to Old Man Han, Triangle God, Cammy the Killer, Jazba, Mortis, Isaac the Collector, Arg Seals, Wormy, and Terry Hints. Thank you guys for supporting the channel. If you'd like to become a channel member, it's only $2.99 and there's a link in the description. Currently working on some newer incentives for channel membership, just because I feel like right now I'm probably not rewarding the people who have actually, pledged very well. I made it pretty clear in the original announcement video that I didn't have many ideas for incentives, but it still kind of feels bad to not reward people for supporting you monetarily, so I'll probably have that up and running at the end of the month. But thank you guys for the support, thank you for watching, have a great night, take care, and I love you guys.